everybody, and welcome back to Psychedelics Today. This is Joe Moore coming at you from Breckenridge, Colorado. Today on the show, we have something special for you. Dena Justice comes back and shares an amazing story of healing. And the amount of healing is kind of hard to express, and she gets into it over the course of this podcast. And I'm really grateful for Dena, her friendship and teaching and much more. Yeah, just a lot of support and encouragement. And I'm just so happy that Dena has come to the point where she can share stories like this. So yeah, Dena Justice has been on the show a number of times before. She's contributed a masterclass to navigating psychedelics around NLP and altered states of consciousness. And now has a new project called Psychedelic Ministries. So really freaking cool situation that she's got going. And I recently completed her NLP training and timeline therapy training. It's really cool. I learned a ton. Big transformations for me in that class too. So yeah, keep tracking Dena. She's got a lot of amazing stuff coming. Her Instagram's great. She's got an amazing Clubhouse channel. I'm sure we'll put links to that in the show notes. I don't really know how Clubhouse works yet, even though I went on once. I'll figure it out eventually. Sorry for being an old man. Yeah. So what else? Yeah, just thank you, Dena, for being you. And thanks for doing this podcast. It's a big deal. And check out Dena's work over at Ecstatic Collective and Psychedelic Ministries. And yeah, just a reminder that you can find our classes at psychedeliceducationcenter.com. We kick off our next 8-week program in May 20 specifically. And it's amazing. Navigating Psychedelics for Clinicians and Therapists, psychedeliceducationcenter.com. And I think that's it for the intro. So enjoy this episode with Dena, and I'll see you on the other side. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Psychedelics Today. Today on the show, we have Dena Justice back again. Dena, how are you doing today?
I'm good, Joe. Thanks. How are you?
Doing lovely. So we are going to dig into a really interesting story that you've decided you want to share. And I'm pretty excited. And maybe we can chat just a little bit about how you're kind of feeling about kind of opening up a little bit about this story.
Yeah, thanks for that. Before we dive in, Joe, I just want to also say, thank you for taking time to record this podcast, because this is pretty significant for me. It's a journey I've been on that I had no idea I was going on. So I'm feeling pretty tender and really vulnerable because I haven't really shared this story with very many people.
Yeah, well, you're welcome. It's been great working with you and getting to know you, and I'm happy to, help you share this story because it's a pretty big one.
It is. I think it's pretty significant, and my intention with sharing this is that it helps other people.
Mm-hmm. Right, because there's a lot of people out there that listen to this. They're actually not practitioners or trying to get in. They're just trying to get help.
Right. And that's what this is about. I had no idea I was helping myself along the way.
Yeah. All right. So how do you want to start the story, Dena?
Yeah. I want to start by kind of prefacing that through an ayahuasca journey in February, I basically entered this year of what I like to refer to as energy and life cleanup. I was in some pretty significant transitions in my own life, selling a piece of property I'd owned for 12 years in the San Francisco Bay Area. My partner was in the process of wrapping up, actually closing out part of his life in Australia, because that's where he's from originally. And Aya was really clear and Dena, you have to stay here to clean up your life while your partner goes to Australia to clean up his life, because I was supposed to go with him. And we were going to come back from Australia on March 17th. And interestingly, I didn't go. I stayed here to deal with my property. And March 17th is the day we entered shelter at home in California. And my partner came back. And the rest of that message was we each had to clean up our own lives to come powerfully together to co-create our future. And what happened after that this year has been really significant, but it's been quite the layered in buildup to get to what I got to this year. So it's been pretty pretty interesting. So now I want to roll back the clock, if that's all right
Sure.
with you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So part of why this is really vulnerable with me too is I kind of feel like I've been living in my own psychedelic closet, right? In the closet, not really honest and open with some of the people closest to me
Hmm.
around my work with psychedelics. And Joe, even you and I, like our prior podcast episodes we've done together for Psychedelics Today, like I've really focused on talking about this broad spectrum of non-ordinary states of consciousness and haven't really gotten specific with psychedelics. And so
Yeah.
this is all about like my own psychedelic journey. And it was really interesting for me because I kind of ended up being the sitter for all of my friends when we were teenagers and in college.
Yeah.
And I had no interest in doing psychedelics at that time. You know, I grew up in the 80s and I remember all of the propaganda about here's the frying pan and this is your brain and they put the eggs in it and this is your brain on drugs, right?
Right. Of
So like
course.
I just stayed clear of that. And in my 30s, then I had a lot of friends doing work with MDMA, LSD, ayahuasca, and they were really changing their lives. And I started to listen more closely. And I'm like, wait, you took psychedelics and what happened? Like, because you did this stuff intentionally and not recreationally? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, sign me up for that. So on November 21st, 2015, I had my first MDMA experience. Sorry, I'm noticing tears are already welling for me.
Mm.
Thanks for being patient with me as I share this today.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Uh, yeah, I had a really good friend of mine sit with me. We did several sessions together beforehand about my intentions. What are the things I wanted to talk about? Where did I want to go? We went to my favorite beach, which is amazing because I typically have the whole thing to myself. And I had a lot I wanted to talk about, and I was very, very chatty that day. And we were
Mm.
probably several hours in when she asked me a question about my mom. And I totally stopped talking. I don't know exactly how long I sat there quietly. And I finally said, that was really interesting. She's like, yeah, like I do not want to talk about my mother. She said,
Mm.
okay, can I ask about her later? And I said, yeah, you can ask and we'll see what happens. And later that evening, she did ask me, she's like, can I ask you about your mom now? And I said, yeah. And I don't remember exactly what the question was that she asked me. But what I realized while she sat there holding me is that I had developed all of these patterns in my life as a way to keep me safe because of the memories of childhood sexual abuse. And one of the things I realized was my pattern as a child, like between probably first grade and probably age 11 or 12, maybe even 13, was I read books all night long, most nights, so that I wouldn't fall asleep, thinking about the memories and having nightmares. And that was a huge realization for me, was that that pattern that I had always thought like, oh, I just love to read, was a pattern I had developed to keep myself safe from trauma.
Mm.
And that started this whole thing that I had no idea I was going to go down and end up unpacking. I felt like I had done a pretty good job dealing with this abuse starting when I was about 13. I grew up in a pretty amazing spiritual community, Mile High Center for Spiritual Living in Denver. It's now the biggest center for spiritual living in the country. And it's a non-denominational church. They teach from all religions. And I really feel like that was what empowered me as a child and a teenager to really take control of my life.
Mm.
It's also really interesting too, because growing up, learning about the power of our mind and what all the science is showing us now, I learned starting about age 8 to control my thoughts, right? So I could start to fall asleep at night and think about what I wanted in the future instead of these terrorizing memories of the past. And I really feel like that's how I developed my powers of manifestation. So that was a really good foundation for me. And the first time I really spoke out about the abuse I experienced was when I was 13, and it was church camp, teen church camp. And other friends of mine had also experienced things like I had experienced, and it made it safe for me to start to talk about it. So I felt like I had a really good handle on it. This first journey was really significant in starting to show me the different things in my life that were all a result of that abuse. So I'm going to take a breath for a second here.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's really interesting to kind of fast forward. I had several other journeys. Let me also say this, like at that time when I had that first journey, I had been in talk therapy for about 3 years with really little impact and results from that. And what was fascinating, Joe, is I felt like my therapist kept trying to imply or suggest that there was negative emotion stored up in me towards my mom or my father because of the abuse and other things in childhood. And I was like, no, I'm good. Like I have great relationships with both of my parents. And that next day after that first journey, another friend came and spent a majority of the day with me. And it was like the biggest anger session of my life, like screaming and yelling and pounding on my bed. And it was all this anger I had towards my mom.
Mm.
And it's towards my mom because, so it's really interesting too. I'm going to tie in a little bit about what I teach, because what I teach in neuro-linguistic programming and timeline therapy, all of these tools are really significant to my own healing journey, right? NLP changed my life. Timeline therapy changed my life because what we know about how we create our reality and our operating system is most of this is created before age 7. We have all these really specific formative experiences in our life, and they create our operating system while we're little sponges. And we're meaning making machines. So all of this information comes in from our sensory experience, and we encode it and we give it meaning. And from that, we create our belief structure. And a lot of those beliefs are limiting beliefs. So starting to understand for myself where all of my limiting beliefs came from, I can now, going through what I've been through, I can tie every significant major belief in my life back to this one experience when I was 4 years old. And the abuse had probably been going on for a pretty significant time already. And I told my mom, I said, I'm not safe. Don't make me go back there. And those were the words I used because, of course, my abuser had said if I ever told anybody, they would hurt me even more, right? So I didn't say exactly what was happening, but I said, I'm not safe. Don't make me go back there. And this whole morning as a 4-year-old is ingrained in my memory. Like I remember what I was wearing. I remember the way my mom looked. I remember the sunlight streaming into the living room through our front windows. She ended up leaving the house for a while with my sister. And I was like, thank God I don't have to go there, right? And my mom came back and she was just angry. And I'm standing at the top of the flight of the stairs, screaming at her and sobbing because she's not hearing me. And in that moment, I created an entire set of beliefs that literally ran my show until 3 months ago. And it's pretty significant to get to see how these moments in our life can be so pivotal and why it's so important to do this kind of work, right? I look at the fact that I spent 3 years doing talk therapy with nearly no movement and no results. And it was the things I was doing outside of therapy that were getting me support. But then I look at what I've done since I started really utilizing psychedelics intentionally, and my whole life changed, right? In the last 5 years, my whole life is completely different than where I was in November of 2015. And I don't look at the person in the mirror and recognize her anymore the way I was familiar with myself before. I'm like, where did this woman come from? She's pretty amazing. And to feel so different about who I am in my life, and getting to unpackage that all, it's pretty incredible. I'm gonna take a breath again. Let you chime in with anything you have here so far, Joe.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So stuff, that happens in early childhood is clearly, and this is a great case of that, sticks around for a long time.
Yeah.
And it often steers the way we live.
Yeah.
And, oftentimes it's stuff even before we're born too. But clearly in this case, it's, you were born.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, but it's interesting that you say that too, Joe, because through all my experience with timeline therapy, especially as I've unraveled things related to my mom, so much of where I go in timeline therapy is my birth, right? And we know from epigenetics, like how all of this stuff is getting passed down to us through our genes and this like innate encoding that happens. It's really fascinating. But yeah, like I can see the web. I got to actually see the web this summer between all of these really significant journeys. It was like the spider web. And here's this pivotal experience at age 4. And I can see how that web created my life. And it's just really fascinating, right? Like knowing what I know about neuroscience and human development. I taught classes in human development before and timeline therapy and all of this stuff. It's just really, really fascinating now to get to have a different kind of understanding because of the experience I've gone through.
Yeah. It's really helpful to have that kind of, I guess, academic background to help understand yourself too. Like not only the NLP tools, but like a more scientific understanding of development. And like it's definitely really helpful and important.
It is.
And it's I feel like I have a real advantage over a lot of folks because of that, because I've been studying this stuff for so long. And I think you too, like you've been studying this stuff for ages.
Yeah. And I love to learn.
Like you were in development stuff when you were super young, right?
Right. Yeah. I took my first social emotional training class when I was 7. And my mom and I have had some really interesting conversations about how I have this really unique way of connecting to people and understanding people. And I really feel like that was all a result of being super sick as a child. I was super sick till about age 3, lots of ear, nose, throat issues. I was so sick, I was on antibiotics and I was 90% deaf because of all of these ear, nose, throat stuff going on. So I didn't have language as a tool, but I had nonverbal communication as a tool. And I learned to be able to really read people really well. And because of that, like they recognized, oh, this child is a unique way of like talking to all the kids in her class and to adults. And they put me in these social emotional training classes. And that kind of set me up for all sorts of other classes along the way, like leadership development, conflict mediation, and conflict management training, all sorts of stuff. So by the time I was 15, I was already teaching personal development courses. And that's just continued right into my life to put me where I am now, where I'm doing this amazing coaching with people and training other people in NLP, timeline therapy, how to be amazing coaches as well. So yeah, this having such an understanding of how we develop, right? Whether that's through personal development courses or through studying psychology itself, however people are acquiring this knowledge, like this, I think is something that's really supportive in anybody's journey with psychedelics. It's more foundational tools to help people understand themselves, right? Like you and I had talked a little bit about this too, Joe, in preparation for this, like pulling in transpersonal stuff and the different aspects of what we kind of consider to be working with psychedelics in a therapeutic sort of way.
Right. Yeah, psychedelics being just like this wildly open-ended, but like powerful tool.
Yeah. It's so fascinating too, as I'm kind of involved with things, because the goal right now is to create a psychedelic retreat center where people can come and heal, and integrating the plant-based medicines as well as other medicines as they get approved by the FDA, right? So pay attention to what's going on. There's this bigger conversation, right? Big pharma, or big harma, as I like to call them. If you cut the P off, you get the pharmaceuticals, right? They're very prescriptive. You take this pill 4 times a day for the rest of your life. Have fun with that, right? And psychedelics totally break that mold. They're non-prescriptive, right? Especially, I feel, to do all of the work, not just part of the work. Like they're not prescriptive. And I think that's a really significant aspect to this conversation as this whole movement comes into being a thing we can do legally and with prescriptions, right? So how do we create healing journeys that are really client or patient directed and supported through the whole process? I feel like I'm jumping around a little bit all over the place here because I'm nervous.
And it's, really interesting that you're nervous, because traditionally you're able to get in front of pretty big groups of folks, and you've been on here a few times before with no nervousness, but it's clear that something's going on.
Yeah. This makes me super nervous. Like this is all the really personal healing work, right? My own healing journey that's been so unexpected.
Maybe worth mentioning, Dena, is like, this is, the reason you want to open up is it shows other folks the potential here.
Right.
That,
exactly.
They might also be able to heal this way.
Right. Yeah. So let me kind of hop back in here. So there's other things I did in tandem with psychedelics that were really instrumental in my healing process. Running is one of them. Running is my outlet for moving through energy processing, keeping my body going so my mind will work, not getting me stuck, but also a really strong meditation practice. And for me, meditation and running are both things that I just love to do. Like I don't need an excuse to do them. I don't need this like regimen to do them. I'm just like, I'm going to sit down and meditate because I feel like it and I love it. And my meditation practice was super critical in this whole journey, especially before I came to doing psychedelics even more regularly, because it was in my meditation space that I discovered my inner child. And I had always kind of known about inner child work And I didn't ever, I was never drawn to it. And I think that's what's really important about my story too, is nothing I did was something that I went seeking. It was all stuff that I kind of followed my intuition about.
Mm.
So it was in meditation that I discovered that inner little 4-year-old inside of me that I refer to as Little Dena, and how she didn't trust me. And I spent years in meditation developing this trusting relationship with her so that she would open up. And that had to happen in order for this healing journey I've been on with psychedelics to occur too. And learning how to work with her, especially in my current life. Like all of a sudden I get stuck, I get triggered by my partner, I get triggered by somebody else. I can't identify it. It's like, okay, well, what is it for Little Dena? Like, Little Dena, what do you need to ask for? Little Dena, what is it you need? And Joe, the really interesting thing is this theme emerged of safety, how unsafe Little Dena felt, how
Mm.
Little Dena didn't trust anybody. That's one of the significant limiting decisions I can see now in that web from that experience when I was 4, telling my mom I'm not safe. I decided not to trust anybody wholly and completely because here it is, my provider who's not taking care of me. Right.
Mm.
So there's a pretty significant limiting decision. And it was really interesting to do all this meditation work with Little Dena for years because it was who I refer to my current self as current Dena, right? Current Dena and Little
Mm.
Dena just would do all this work together. And I refer to um, my meditations, like what happens inside of me as my meditation landscape. It's this really beautiful place that has different specific areas where over time it started to be like different areas where I was working with what I would call the ages and stages of Dena. And there was like
Mm.
the current version of Dena had her own space that she worked in that was it's like dark fortress. And I was surrounded by a sea of black. And that sea of black was all men. And that was
Mm.
representative of men that wanted to hurt me in a sexual way, or men that wanted something from me that I didn't want to give to them. Right. And so I was at the top of this tower and there's a sea of black and I had no way to get out of this tower. There was no way in and there was no way out. And other people were like, well, why don't you just blow up the tower and transform it? Because it's in my mind. Right. And I know through what I teach in neuro-linguistic programming, how our mind works and how we can create different images. And I really understood that it wasn't about like transforming it that way. It's that I really had to create a new reality for myself. And I say this now, but I didn't know it at the time, but that new reality was one of safety. And I had to create that safety inside of me. So one of the things I love to say is safety is an inside job. And that was a
Mm.
huge journey through all this work with Little Dena and the ages and stages of Dena and current Dena and my work with psychedelics that became like starting to understand what does it mean for Dena to be safe? What do I need to create safety? And that included things like I had to learn what boundaries were and create boundaries for myself. And that meant I had to speak up for my boundaries in really big ways. And I had some good boundaries. Like because of the abuse, I had really strong boundaries around my body, right? Like this girl out there trying to date in the Bay Area in a very polyamory location who won't get physical with somebody for months, right? And I'm like this anomaly, and that was really hard for me to navigate because I had such strong boundaries around my body. Right? It's being
Mm.
so careful, but I had to learn my boundaries in other ways. It was really about utilizing my voice, saying, this is what I want. This is what I don't want. This is what I'm available for. This is what I'm not available for. Uh, And that was really challenging, especially when your voice gets shut down as a child, trying to learn how to utilize that and to actually be heard from a place of I can show up and speak authentically and vulnerably instead of from a place of defensiveness. Like prior version of myself, the only way I knew how to get my message through was from being defensive, like because I had to protect myself, right? I had to defend myself because it was the only way to keep myself safe. And I had to learn a new way of being and create that new operating system, that new reality that was based on safety. And it started with boundaries. It started with building this trust with little Dena inside of me to be able to identify what did I actually need and what did I need to ask for. And sometimes it was just as simple, like with my partner, to say, I don't feel safe right now. Can you just hold me? Or to acknowledge, like, little Dena's so scared right now, she doesn't have words. Or even to say, what I'm experiencing right now is pre-verbal and there aren't words for it at all. And luckily, like, my partner is the most incredible man and such a compassionate human in general that he's helped me create this space of safety so that this healing journey could really evolve. And then he really supported me in allowing me to do so much intentional work with the same person every month. In April, so let me back up a little bit.
Sure.
At this point, I've been 2015, November 2015 was my first MDMA experience. And then over the next couple of years, I had a handful of more psychedelic experiences, and mostly when I felt like I was pretty stuck in my life. And then I started microdosing mushrooms regularly, like super regularly. And I loved that because it became this new layer to my meditations. I spent a lot of time in Vegas while I was doing all my NLP training. And I would take like a microdose or a low dose of mushrooms up to about 0.5 grams. And I would go lay naked in the desert because I love the sunshine. And I would just lay there in meditation about something that was challenging me until I got the clarity I needed. And then I would just sit there and journal about it. So I started to see how effective psychedelics were helping me at finding solutions in my life, moving me through fear. I got to see through my second MDMA journey how much fear had literally been in the driver's seat my entire life. I did so many things in my life because I was so scared of certain outcomes or elements. The biggest one was money. Like, I have an amazing relationship with money, but that's because it was all fear-based, like scared to not have enough, right? And all of that. So several years have gone by. I'm doing this occasional work with psychedelics, starting to microdose, having all of these incredible, powerful meditations with the ages and stages of Dena. For the longest time, it was just little Dena and current Dena. And then in January of 2017, my 15-year-old self showed up. And then my future self showed up. And that became the four of us. I refer to that group as one team, making up one Dena. And like the work that I did was so significant. And I want to specifically point this out because there's a lot of different modalities out there that do what we refer to as parts work or parts integration, internal family system stuff, where we've literally fragmented a part of us off. And for whatever reason, it's kind of separate. And so through my own work and teaching of parts integration, like I really get to see and understand what happened. My 4-year-old self was a part of me. She was very separate from me, very compartmentalized. Like I would even say like imprisoned in her own way. And that was like the prison of the trauma, right? And so I had to create this part of me and compartmentalize it, isolate it in order for the rest of me to be able to function and to move through my life in the ways I did and to be productive and to be successful and to not let that trauma impact my life every day in a negative way. there's a lot of beautiful things that I created in my life because of the abuse, but it was because of how I responded to my experience of the abuse that I was able to do that. And then I had this 15-year-old self that was compartmentalized also and literally imprisoned. And I would say she was imprisoned in like a dark dungeon where nobody could get to see her, where my 4-year-old little Dena was just in a prison. I would talk about the abuse with people, but this 15-year-old part of me, most people in my adult life had no idea she existed. And my 15-year-old self was my spiritual self. Again, I grew up in a really spiritual community. I had a really great connection to my spirituality. And at 15 in meditation, I was sitting in the sanctuary in our church in meditation, and I got this download that, sorry, tearing up again. I got this download at 15 that ministry was my calling. And because of the word ministry, I thought that meant religion, and it made me shove it in a box and hide it away. So that 15-year-old part of me got cut off, isolated, compartmentalized, put in a dark place, and pretty much left there where nobody got to see her. All of my spiritual practice became a really significantly solo practice starting in my early 20s when I really stepped away from my church. And my spiritual practice and my own spiritual practice was very much about nature. I loved the Native American teachings. I participated in my first sweat lodge at 13. And I just really connected to that. And I always had such a strong connection to nature. So like I just tucked it in the closet. Nobody knew that part of me existed until my girlfriends were having circles together. And I got upset. I'm like, why aren't I invited? And they're like, you don't do that. And I'm like, wow, nobody in my life knows that I have this whole spiritual side to me because I keep it so well hidden. Right. So through all of my work with my meditations, I've discovered that my spiritual self, her name is I Am, which is very fitting because that's such a powerful statement. There's a lot of conversation about I am being like the most powerful statement in the English language and how much that connects to our spirituality. And I've gone through this huge healing journey as well over the last 5 years of, well, what does ministry mean to me? And how do I integrate ministry into my life now? I spent a lot of time back in Colorado. Only like 3 people knew I was doing this, but part of the reason why I was spending so much time in Colorado for a couple of years was so that I could be in my spiritual home, going to my church 3 or 4 days a week, taking classes, sitting in the sanctuary, listening to the ministers talk, and it's all about how do we change our lives? How do we create magnificent lives? How do we love ourselves more? How do we create forgiveness? All of this. I considered going to ministerial school, and I'm like, I don't want another master's degree. I already have 2. I don't want to spend more time doing this. And like divine downloads were like, no, you have all of the information you need within you. You just need to figure out what ministry is. And I've really come around to that. And I'll talk more about this too at the end, Joe. But basically, like I've come to know ministry is my calling and psychedelics are my religion. Like I feel like I've come full circle at 15. That's when I started sitting with my friends when they were doing psychedelics. Like it took me a long time, but I came full circle in this. I feel like I'm losing my train of thought because it's going in so many different directions right now. You want to chime in with anything there, Joe?
Well, it's really hard to like tell a story like this, right? Because there's so many interconnected pieces.
Yeah.
One of the reasons I love Lenny Gibson is that he's easily can go on these tangents that seem totally unrelated, but they're still so fascinating. And it's like when we tell our own stories that can often feel, it's kind of hard. You're like, oh, why am I talking about this trip I took to Alaska? It's not relevant, but it's like kind of is because it's part of your story. And it's.
Yeah.
Yeah. No,
I'm
really appreciating this, Dena. It's really nice to learn all this about you. And
yeah.
we've known each other for a while now. So it's like, oh, so all these other new things.
Yeah. We met right after I set this intention. I was like, oh, well, if when I do psychedelics, they help me get the fuck out of my own way. And all my microdosing is doing me so much good. So, like, why don't I just set a bigger intention? So, in going into January of 2019, I was like, this is going to be a year of intentional medicine work. I'm going to do 2 journeys a month. They don't necessarily have to be like big journeys, but they're going to be 2 intentional journeys. So you and I met right after that. And because I set that intention, right? This is the power of manifestation. When we have an intention and we're aligned with it, things start to show up. So things started to show up. I did 5-MeO-3-MD for the first time right after you and I met on Valentine's Day of that year. And that was a really beautiful and significant journey for me. And I had somebody sit with me 2 weeks after that while I did LSD. Even before that, like in January, I had had a pretty significant LSD journey for my birthday. And, there was more ayahuasca, and it just kept I just kept trusting the timing of every one of these journeys. Sometimes they were kind of planned, and sometimes it was like, oh, now it feels right. And sometimes it was just like half a gram of mushrooms, but it was always just this intention to keep myself out of my way. And in April of that year, I started working with the same person, whether we want to call them a guide or my sitter. It's interesting, like, are they my guide? Or are they not? Because I'm really the guide. But I started sitting with the same person really regularly in April of 2019. And the work with that person became instrumental in what was to unfold. In January of 2019, I discovered an album. It's called Koan, Koan. God, When the Silence Speaks is the name of the album. And that album became like my favorite album to listen to during my journeys. Sorry, the album is When the Silence is Speaking. And one song on that album in particularly really resonated with me. So when that song would come on, I would put it on repeat. And little did I know, like, I was layering in things that were to be instrumental in coming together this past September during my high dose journey. And, I'm just like layering things in. My partner and I, because we started our relationship with my big boundaries around my body to say, I'm not here to get physical with you. I'm here to see what the energy is between us and to really see if we want to co-create the most amazing relationship together. And he was on board for that. And because there wasn't physical intimacy between us in that way, like we would sleep together in the same bed naked, holding each other, but there wasn't any sexual energy. Like we weren't doing anything. It allowed us to just create so much safety and trust and emotional intimacy between us, and to really take things deep and learn how to communicate with each other in ways that were amazing and effective. And we both felt like we got to be heard for the first time in our life by somebody important to us. And we built this incredible relationship. And because of my boundaries with my body, there was one night we were having a great time making out. And he asked me the question. He said, "What is it, Dena, that makes you want to wait?" And he's not trying to push for anything. He's just really trying to gain understanding of my experience. And I'm like, I've been asking myself that my entire life. And I don't really know what the answer is to that. And he's like, I've got an idea. Can I share it with you? I said, yes. He's like, is it because you want to be loved for who you truly are and not because of your beautiful body? And I burst into tears. And I was like, yeah, you just nailed that. And that night he said, you're safe. You're safe here in your body. You're safe here on this couch. You're safe here with me. You're safe in this house. You're safe on this hill. You're safe creating a life with me. And this became like what I refer to as the things. I'm like, say the things to me, right? And coming back to this theme of safety. So I taught my sitter to say these things to me too. I'm like, okay, so I need you to say these things to me. My sitter's like, okay, no problem. I'll say those things to you, all about safety. So we're learning all these tools, all these things that Dena needs and all the ages and stages of Dena needed to hear, like the things that had never been said to me before. I just keep doing all this intentional work. And in October of 2019, I had another ayahuasca journey that I was scared to death to go into. And before that journey, I was with my sitter. That was mushrooms. And I had so much fear coming up. My sitter's like, what's all this fear about? I don't know. I'm not really sure specifically. And I was able to start to understand that I was scared to death. I was going to have memories of the abuse surface that were repressed. And so going into that ayahuasca ceremony, I was so scared. And the first night, I'd had my first cup and I was laying there, and I had so much fear in me, and I was able to discover that that fear came from Little Dena, and it was Little Dena being scared to death that I was going to make her do something she didn't want to do, because that's what happened when I was a child. I was made to do things I didn't want to do. It's like, I'm not going to make you do anything that you don't want to do. Like, I've got your back. I've got you. I'm taking care of you. And that started to become a really important element of like paying even more attention to Little Dena and what was her experience and what was she telling me and how was she getting me to pay attention to her and honor her and take care of her and essentially start to integrate her back into me. Taking a breath here. You're doing a great job listening, Joe. I thought we would have a lot more conversation today.
Yeah.
Thanks for letting me share that, because I think by the time I get to the end of this, my hope is that it helps other people out there. And this is never something I thought I would ever share so publicly. So I think something else that's really important for me to bring into this is right after I started my relationship with my partner, that was coming out of about 3 years of being intentionally single, where I wanted to learn about my patterns and behaviors in relationships, not just intimate relationships, but all of my relationships, because I wanted to stop them, because I wanted to have even more amazing relationships and to have the best relationships I could possibly create with other humans. And through that experience, I really got clear on like how much codependency ran my relationships. And I made a vow, like, I'm breaking my patterns of codependency. So when my partner and I started to create our relationship, I got really clear that I needed to stop the pattern where it started. And that was with my mom. And I didn't have necessarily a big intention about this, but I just didn't feel compelled to communicate with her. So I didn't. And that went on for nearly a year. And again, even though I had this situation with the abuse, my mom and I have still had a really beautiful relationship my whole life. There was just parts of it that really weren't safe for me and things I wanted to get away from, especially that codependency. And then in November of 2019, again, another ayahuasca ceremony. I came out of my ceremony just with I took self-love to an even deeper level. It was the most profound and significant ayahuasca journey I've ever had, where I thought I loved myself. And Aya showed me all the ways in which I still was trying to prove that I was lovable and worthy and deserving. And it was the most humbling journey I've ever had with ayahuasca, to really get to know, like, I am enough and I am more than enough. And when I came out of that set of ceremonies, I was like, just going to continue to trust this. Like, right now, I have no desire to talk to my mother. And my feeling right now in this moment is that I never want to talk to her again. And about 2 months later, during another round of ayahuasca ceremonies in Costa Rica, Aya finally showed me what I needed in order to have a relationship with my mom again. I was to go to my mother on my birthday, which is January 18th, and tell her that I get to be the child and not the parent. Because about age 5, I started to be the parent in our relationship. And I did that. So that was this last January. So January of 2020, on my birthday, I went. My sister helped facilitate me talking to my mom. And I was like, I get to be the child and not the parent. And I don't know what this means from here, but I just trust this. And since then, my mom and my sister and my sister was so feeling the same way in a lot of ways, that the three of us decided to do this really beautiful, intentional work together. And nearly every Thursday since January, we've been doing what we call family co-creation. And I've basically been coaching my family for us to heal our relationships and to create the most amazing relationships between us. And it has totally transformed all of us in huge ways. It's transforming my sister's relationship with her husband. It's transforming my mom's relationship with her man partner. And it's rippling out beyond the three of us. And so this has been another huge element of what has supported this healing journey I've been on, is healing the relationships with my mom and my sister. And I had a lot of stuff around my sister and the abuse also, and feeling like my sister didn't protect me, and putting a lot of blame on my sister, even though, like, it wasn't my sister's job as a child, right? My sister was doing the best she could as a child also. So it's like, it's really fascinating to kind of see how all of these different things that I've done have come together to create this experience that I've been through this year. You want to say anything over there? I just also continue to feel so nervous. So I feel like, take the spotlight off of me for a second.
Yeah. Yeah. So, like, this idea of doing family work like that it's like an example of the level of ownership you're taking over your life.
Right.
Like, I can't think of too many people, Dena, who have taken this level of self-responsibility. And, it's so easy to say, oh, it's because in a lot of cases it's true and it's unavoidable, right? When you're just barely able to survive. But for many people, there's a lot of agency that you can reclaim. And, like, you're kind of highlighting how people are able to reclaim a lot of that.
Right.
And I think it's really important that you're kind of leading by example in a lot of ways. That, maybe your primary intention is to have the best life you can, but it's also by doing that you're really leading.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for seeing that and articulating it in that way, Joe. That feels really good. And that's exactly it, right? Like, that was the things I was taught growing up in Mile High Center for Spiritual Living. Like, if you don't like something in your life, you have the power to change it. And it's your responsibility to change it. So that was ingrained into me. So I was like, all right, well, I'm not happy with how my relationship is with my mom. What do I want different? I'm not happy with the relationship with my sister. Well, what do I want different? I mean, my sister and I, like, there were times as children and teenagers we got along, but in my 20s, I stopped talking to my sister for years. And there was a better part of 10 years where we didn't have a lot to say to each other. And it was because I was learning to stand up for myself and my boundaries and to be like, you cannot treat me that way anymore. And I would just leave. I'm like, no, I told you I won't be treated that way anymore. So I'm walking away. I learned to set boundaries in my relationship with my sister because I wouldn't tolerate how she was treating me. And I think that's a really important thing to understand is nobody treats us a certain way. We allow that treatment to happen. So I didn't want to be treated that way anymore. It was my responsibility to make it stop, whether that meant by not having a relationship with her or by being able to have a lot of really fucking uncomfortable conversations. And for us to slowly work through things, right? My sister and I both acknowledge how challenging that was for both of us, but how much we've learned and grown because of it. And that, it's really amazing doing this work with my mom because I constantly come back to the place and like I thank the universe for the teachings I had growing up from my church, but also the teachings I have from NLP because they're foundational. And like one of the things we believe is everyone's doing the best they can with what they have. So I remind myself and my mom, I'm like, Mom, I know you were doing the best you could at the time. And I want to remind you as I share this next thing with you, Mom, this is about a child's experience and the meaning that child made it have and how it affected my life and my decisions. And it's not, I never share from a place of I'm trying to blame my mother for what happened because it's not my mother's fault, right? I'm sharing from a place of how can I let my mom hear me and see me and feel me? And how can I find forgiveness inside of me and with her so that we can have a different reality together and a different future relationship? And she's been really able, and we've had to call her out like, Mom, you have to step out of your codependency. It's not our job to take care of you emotionally. It's your job to take care of yourself emotionally. Like, we need you to be able to hear us and to let us express ourselves. And for you to know that this is about us and us sharing ourselves with you. It's not about you. And she's been really able to step into that and to hear us and to see us and for us to transform our relationship so that my sister and I both get to have this experience of like, I'm the child in my relationship and that's my parent, that's my mother. Like for a long time, I was referring to her as her name, like be like, Miss So-and-so is not my responsibility, right? Like as a reminder to myself to really transform the relationship so that I could step into what I wanted it to be. And it's been fascinating too, Joe, to do all of my psychedelic healing work this year alongside of this healing work with my mom and my sister because of how much they've gone hand in hand and how they've been so integral to each other. And me having my healing psychedelic experiences and then sharing them with my mom and my sister has led us to find more things to work on. And that as we find those things to work on and we work on them, these show up in my journey work. And it's like the layers and the layers and the layers. And I'm like, well, how deep is this going to go? Well, I got to find out how deep it was going to go. Joe, is there anything you want to say in there? Because I feel like I should switch gears into like the significant things that happened this year. And I also want to be mindful of our time.
Right. No, it's just continuing that story of like, this is a developing thing. It's all in relationship. Like almost everything is relationship, right? Like if it was just one thing, there wouldn't be much relationship there.
Right.
So we've got to do this together. It takes two to tango. And that's a really hard pill to swallow for some people.
Yeah.
Because it feels, really hurtful. Like I'm not saying victim blaming.
Right.
But you could have, no, not in your case, but in a lot of cases, like that person can get out of there. Like at 3 years old, that's a little impossible. Like that, I don't think that agency's there yet.
Right.
But at a certain point, it does develop.
Yeah. Well, I think that's really interesting to bring that up too, right? Well, what was the agency I had as a 4-year-old child? I knew how to hide.
Yeah.
I was really fucking good at hiding. So guess what I learned to do? I learned how to hide and stay really quiet so I would be safe. And that was a theme in my life that I got to reveal to myself. Like, why is it that I like to go in the middle of nowhere? Like, I like to take these long road trips completely alone. And I like to run trails in the middle of nowhere where there's not another soul around. It's because when I was hiding in nature, there was nobody that could touch me there. There was nobody to hurt me. I was completely safe. It was the only place that I felt some sort of safety in my life from the time I was 4 until I discovered all of this. Right?
Yeah.
Hiding and being quiet in nature was my way to keep myself safe. And it worked.
Right.
And it's really interesting too, Joe, because I started, like, there was always this seeking in me, and I didn't understand what that seeking was about until 2 years ago. This feeling, this theme of home started to arise in me. And my mom's entire side of the family, we all lived really close together in Denver for most of my younger years. And we would have big dinners all together at Grandma Great's house regularly. You know, this could even be like multiple times a week. And there could be 4 or 5 of us there or 30 of us there. And I loved it. I loved the way it felt when my whole family, my village was all together. And it was this thing that I always, like, I just loved that feeling. And it was kind of this feeling that I felt I was often seeking. And this, what I would call a sense of home. And that became a theme for me. And literally 2 years ago, we might even be like 2 years to the day on recording this, I was at a Tony Robbins event in Florida, a Date with Destiny. And I microdosed LSD every day I was there.
Oof.
And it made it so good. I got really good downloads. And a lot of why I was there, though, was to watch Tony Robbins because he's a master of NLP. He calls it neuro-associative conditioning because he literally like walked out on his master's level NLP training and was like, I don't need your program. I can just go do this now, right? And so I went to like watch him do his work. And so he's leading a guided meditation. And I was going along and paying attention to all of the things he was doing that are all like NLP things around this specific thing called submodalities. And I was like, wow, he's so freaking masterful at this. This is amazing. And I'm following along. And I ended up having a profound and amazing insight during that guided meditation that the thing I had been seeking my entire life was this feeling of home. And that feeling I had when I was with my entire family, like I'd finally been able to pinpoint it. And what was even more beautiful is I went from that event to spending a month with my mom's extended family, like my aunts and my uncles and my cousins and my grandmother in Florida. And so I had this aha moment about what I'd been seeking. And then I got to go into being in it for a month. And then I got to go into, coming into creating this relationship with my partner. And we'd already met and we were talking on the phone every day. And then we got to start really creating it. And I was able to identify all these things that I wanted to create in our relationship. And this idea of home is really pivotal because I was able to drill down even further and identify something even more significant during this year. So I kind of have figured out like what I want in my life, right? This home feeling. I start doing all this intentional work twice a month in January of 2019, right after this event with Tony Robbins and this time with my family. I start to uncover all this stuff with Little Dena through Aya journeys. I start to heal my relationship with my mother in January of 2020. And then this year, really significantly since Burning Man of 2019 started even more intentional work. Like, let's do some deep work. I came back from Burning Man, was with my sitter and started to release all of this trauma from my body through massage, right? Like, here, can you touch me here? And like barely touching me around my hips, my pelvis area, barely touching me and like screaming in pain, sort of trauma energy, not really understanding what it was at the time. And now understanding that it was all this childhood sexual abuse energy. And just like journey after journey with my sitter was doing so much hands-on healing work with my body, because we've learned like the body keeps the score, right? My body had stored all this fucking trauma. And I didn't know it at the time, what was happening, but I just kept trusting my intuition. And I would say, can you touch here? Can you push here? Those Costa Rica Aya sits over New Year's last year were really instrumental too. Like so much hands-on body work, where it was like the first night was pushing on my body here or there. And every time it was just like all this belching, and so much energy came out of my body that way. I had one of like the biggest purges after about 4 or 5 hours of purging through belching and shaking, to finally have this huge release, which was all about like, I surrender to the sweet, compassionate, gentle, motherly love, like this feeling I didn't receive from my mom as a child. I finally was able to receive it from all of these other women. Like just these layers of the healing work really started to be revealed. And I feel like I'm kind of rushing through a couple of things to get to the what I think is the really significant stuff. So my sitter and I keep
I've got
doing
another 20 minutes if that's helpful.
Okay, yeah, that's good. I think that's perfect. So thanks, Joe.
No
being
problem.
so patient with this. My sitter and I keep doing work together month after month. And in April of 2020, I had a journey where I really trust my intentions when they come up. And I write them down, whatever comes to me. And sometimes I don't know what they mean. And my intentions for that journey were to be daring in sexy ways and sexy in daring ways. And it was really awkward and weird that like that was my intention. What I got to see because of that intention was the moment I would disassociate from my body. And that's a really common experience for anybody that has sexual or physical abuse trauma in their life, is this dissociation where we're not in our bodies, right? I would say for most of my life, I was very dissociated. And this is evidenced through my incredibly high pain tolerance level. I've had doctors tell me I have the highest pain tolerance of anybody they've ever seen. Like I shattered my wrist into multiple pieces. I had no medication at all. And when they said it, I didn't shed a tear. I just screamed at the top of my lungs, and my blood pressure remained normal. And they're like, how is that possible? And it's all because of dissociation. So in this journey, I got to literally, like I was turning my body to the right and I stopped and I'm like, holy shit. My sitter's like, what just happened? I'm like, I just saw the moment I would leave my body. And the whole day ended up being about catching these moments. I'm like, there I go. I want to leave my body again. There I go. I want to leave my body. Oh, I want to leave my body again. Anytime I didn't feel safe, I wanted to leave my body. The dissociation was just so clear. And then the next several journeys just kind of layered things up around the dissociation and like making it safe to be in my body, and also started to bring up so much anxiety for me. I'd never really had a lot of anxiety in my journeys. And now all of a sudden, every journey I'm having is like just riddled with anxiety. And my sitter and I just constantly talking about what anxiety is coming up for me now and what anxiety is coming up for me now. And then the next really significant journey was 4th of July, 2020. Most of my journeys during 2020 have been a combination of LSD with MDMA. And I often do about 200 to 250 mics of LSD. And I had my LSD that day, and it was literally like 8 ayahuasca ceremonies and 1 LSD journey. I never got to take the MDMA that day because it was just so challenging. And I worked through so much shame around my body, so much not feeling safe in my body, so much feeling betrayed by my body, but also my body feeling betrayed by me because of how I didn't take care of it in some ways. Really, my body and I having this experience of like, I got to start showing up and caring for my body in even better ways than I already was. But the most significant part of that day, Joe, was my sitter, again, doing body work on me. I'm like, hey, can you push on this spot in the middle of my back, just to the left of my spine, like by my left shoulder blade? And my sitter's pushing on that spot. And Joe, do you know how there's tumblers in a lock? And as you put a key into the lock, the little grooves in the key line up with the tumblers in the lock so that when you turn the key, it lines up with all the tumblers correctly for it to unlock.
Yeah.
So that's what it felt like in my body. It felt like all of the ways my sitter was pushing on this spot. And I can be really specific, like, okay, push in and like at a 45-degree angle towards my hip and hook your finger under there, right? Like I can trace exactly where the energy that is in my body that it needs to be released. So my sitter's doing that. And all of a sudden I have this huge like relief. It felt like all the tumblers in the lock lined up into place. And it felt like I literally got clicked into my body. And I said the words, welcome. Sorry, tears again. I said the words, welcome home. And I haven't dissociated from my body since that journey. So it's like I literally got locked into my own body that day. And it's like I get to have a whole different experience of living in my body now and taking really, really fucking good care of my body. Like taking care of my body in such great ways. And that was really just a beautiful journey, as hard as it was, all the layers I went through. It was so significant for me because I get to live in my body now. When you haven't lived most of your life in your body, it's a pretty interesting feeling to be like, wow, I'm in this thing all the time.
So having bodily sensations, being aware of where you are in space and like...
Exactly. I used to run into door jams and furniture and walls constantly. I would have bruises all over my body and not know where they came from because I would just constantly run into things. And that's from dissociation.
Right.
Yeah. And, you know, to come into my body in different ways over the last several years, right? I had such a high pain tolerance, but what's the other side of pain, Joe?
The inverse would be pleasure.
Right. So my experience of pleasure, my body was so shut down. My experience of experiencing pleasure in my body was non-existent and was a really slow learning process. I mean, I started that in about my mid-20s, but it really wasn't until the last couple of years that I got to truly understand and experience what pleasure is in my body and that it's safe for me to be in my body having that experience.
Right.
Yeah. So fascinating layers. That journey on 4th of July, because it was so challenging, like I'm really good at doing my integration work and trusting the timing. And one of my tasks was no journeys for a while. And I was like, right. I told my sitter, I'm like, there's not going to be any journeys for a while. And my sitter was like, no problem. I got you. Just let me know when you're ready. And during that time is when I got to see the web, Joe, of all of the limiting decisions I'd made in my life and how that experience as a 4-year-old telling my mom I'm not safe had created my entire life. And it was this really fascinating experience for me, how I held that picture in my mind, because I got to see the web and I got to see it light up the way light catches on a spider web and you can see all its details. It was like that. And then I had this really fascinating experience of it like being covered in dew and freezing. And then the next thing I want to share is like shattering that web, shattering that web so it no longer got to control my life. And the first element that happened in that was I kept having all of this anger show up for me. And my partner and I had a couple of challenging things happen during the summer, just in like navigating our lives and all sorts of different elements of our lives. And we had some friction between us, and we're really good at keeping that clean energy between us. But in this time we had friction. And I asked him if he would hold space for me to release that anger. I'm like, I just have the desire to break glass and it just keeps coming up. And I feel like I need to actually do this in order to release this energy from me. And he, at that time he was like, I don't feel safe doing this because of like what's happening between us. I'm like, I hear you and I understand that. And I'm like, can you stand in the fire with me? Like, you have been doing such an incredible job loving me and the ages and stages of Dena. Can you stand in the fire with me and love my shadow too? And he was able to understand that my anger wasn't about him and didn't have anything to do with him. And he could just hold that space for me. And so we have a space where we live where we took a bunch of mason jars. I had a bunch of 8-ounce mason jars and then quart size mason jars, 32 ounces. And as I was throwing these jars about 20 feet against a cement wall. And as I was breaking the little ones, it was all the anger and the tears from little Dena and the abuse and not being listened to and not being heard when I said I wasn't safe. And then when I transitioned to the big jars, it was like all the anger at my mom for not listening to me when I shared that with her and for not protecting for me, and just a lot of other things I had held in there. And my partner just held this beautiful, compassionate, loving space for me. And it was really interesting because it felt like this thing that had to happen in order for me to get to the next step. And I also, about this time, started working with a voice coach. I call her a voice witch because she's not just like a voice coach. There's so much more she does. And we really started to understand that this experience I was having had to do with like trying to sing, had to do with not being heard as a child and my voice not being honored and recognized when I was 4 years old. So stuff just started to come up from little Dena in big ways. And it was really scaring me. And I shared some stuff about the abuse with my voice switch that I had never told another person, right? And I'm like, I don't want to tell my partner and I don't want to tell my sitter because they both have so much they hold already for me. Like, I don't want to put anything else on them. And I definitely don't want them to have these images in their head. And it started to be safe for little Dena to actually feel heard. And then it was time for another journey. And I was really scared. And I asked my sitter, I'm like, how do you feel about sitting with little Dena? Because I think it's time that little Dena did some pretty significant work. And my sitter was like, I can do that. Do you feel safe enough for that to happen? And I'm like, I think so. I don't think I'd be asking otherwise. And I did a high dose. I did at least 750 mics of LSD that day. And it was in that journey that I realized all the layers that had been put together over 5 years that were so critical to letting the 4-year-old inside of me have that journey. And there was so much physical shaking on a concrete floor. My sitter was doing their best to keep my body safe. And I just kept shaking and shaking and shaking and shaking, like convulsive shaking. And I don't remember a lot of it. And a lot of it was not coherent, what I was saying. But I do remember is kind of scrambling after my sitter on multiple occasions to literally wrap my body around theirs and saying the words, I just want to be safe. I just want to be safe. I just want to be safe. Can you please keep me safe? And my sitter was repeating all those things my partner had been saying to me about it's safe to be in your body. It's safe for you to be here. It's safe for you to be on this couch. It's safe for you to be in this house. It's safe for you to be doing this work. It's safe for little Dena. It's safe for I am. It's safe for the ages and stages of Dena. It's safe for you to be all of you, all of the time. And we're listening to this album in the background. And when that one song came on that I love, that I connect to so much, I had the biggest purge. And all that energy came out of my body. And I just finally felt like this indescribable release. And not just that, Joe, but I literally saw all of this energy moving, and I traveled up one thread of this energy to a point of light. And I articulated so clearly. I said, wow, I found the frequency of safety. I can see it and I can feel it in my entire being. And this is what I've been seeking my entire life. And the rest of the day is lots of other stuff, but it was like little Dena got to do all this work and let go of the childhood sexual abuse. I didn't have to go into any other memories. What I do realize is that I think the abuse started way earlier than I was aware of, super nonverbal, and how much trauma was stored in my body. And I kept saying, like, no child should ever have to experience that. And everybody who has trauma should be able to experience this kind of healing. Everybody should get to feel this free from the past that has tormented them. But what else shocked me a lot was coming out of that journey over the next several days. I kept going, where's my anxiety? My anxiety completely disappeared. And Joe, you and I have talked tons about anxiety. We had a whole podcast on anxiety. And this happened right after we recorded that, right? Like, I have completely freed myself from anxiety. And it's such an interesting feeling to no longer be driven by fear and anxiety in my life, right? Like, if I do have anxiety all come up, I'm actually able to go, oh, I understand what I feel anxious about. And it's not that I feel anxious, it's that I'm able to identify now it's excitement that I have in me, not anxiety. So it's been super amazing. And this whole thing has continued in the fact that about a week after that journey, I'm freed up from this trauma. I'm freed up from anxiety. And now I start to think, I need to share this story. But the first person I have to share it with is the person I'm scared to death to tell. And that was my father, because he didn't know about the abuse. And I'd kind of made a vow that I was never going to tell him about it. Like, why does he need to know? Why put that on him? So I had to do a lot of work to get clear on telling him, and feeling compelled to tell my story. I wanted him to hear it from me before he heard it someplace else, like here. So I went to Colorado in November to talk to my dad, to tell him about my healing work with psychedelics, and to get clean on what I really am up to in my life around creating a psychedelic retreat center. And that I've been doing all of this work, and that I'm an advocate for psychedelic healing and it being a non-prescriptive experience. And, you know, my intention behind telling my father, I had to get really clear on what is my intention. And I think that's so important to keep coming to, right? What are our intentions when we do psychedelics? Well, what are our intentions when we're doing anything? My intention with my dad was to be in integrity with who I am and the life I'm creating, and to be transparent with my father so he can love me and support me even more. And that's exactly what he did in me sharing this with him. Like, he just is loving me even more. He's supporting me even more. We're talking even more. You know, we've opened up new kinds of conversation between us because I was willing to tell him the scariest thing and to have the scariest conversation of my life, and just continuing to transform all of my relationships. So that brings us to now.
Right. And that was kind of recent too. That was only, what, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, maybe?
Yeah, a month. I was in Colorado a month ago.
Mhm.
So my dad and I have had multiple kind of check-in conversations since then, just to see like, how are you doing, Dad? How am I doing? I've had more healing work with my sitter since then, where I really got to integrate my 8-year-old. And actually, to kind of close that out, Joe, right? I shared that I understood why I read books as a child all night long was because of the trauma. And when I shared that with my dad, it was like all these pieces clicked into place for him. Like he started to have a new awareness and comprehension. But that last journey, when I came back from Colorado after having shared with my dad, it was like the 8-year-old inside of me. It was like 2 hours of crying and shaking and more trauma coming out of me around, I don't have to hold this inside anymore. It's not a secret anymore. My daddy knows and I'm safe. I got to tell my dad and he knows and I'm safe and I don't have to hold this and I don't have to read books all night long anymore. And like, I don't have to avoid the trauma memories when I fall asleep anymore. Like they don't bother me at all. Like I can actually sit with the memories and they don't have emotional charge. So it's just like, oh, it's just like this thing that happened in my past and it's not good, bad, right, or wrong. It's just a thing that happened in my past.
Hmm. There's something about Ram Dass said this a while back. It was like it's not that they go away, these neuroses and like problems. It's like they kind of become an old friend.
Yeah, exactly.
And yeah, you're not like that charge isn't there anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think you laid it out really great with your example there. It's just like you can be there, but it's not really anywhere close to as scary as it was previously.
Yeah, exactly. It's not.
Hmm.
It's not scary. It doesn't torment me. It doesn't terrorize me. It's just what is.
So we rarely do these episodes, Dena, where we kind of like do a deep dive into someone's healing journey. And I think maybe that's a mistake on our side because it's a pretty incredible story. You know, your story is helped by who you are, what you've done, and what you do quite a bit. You know, I guess, you know, what else is a story other than that? But you've got a really helpful background to help lay that out.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping people can like learn from this and, you know, perhaps approach their own things that are really scary.
Right. Yeah. Well, and that's part of what I do and the way I do it, right? Like the coaching that I do, helping people. I've always said I help people get the fuck out of their own way, but like this is part of it. What's in your way from the past that's stopping you from getting where you want to go?
Mm-hmm.
And are you willing to dive in and do the work to clean it up? Right? Energy and life cleanup. The more we clean up the past, the more beautiful our future becomes.
Right. Right. As long as we continue to participate in our now. Because a lot of people get lost in the past.
That's right.
Like,
yeah.
how you really gonna spend another two to 12 years on your inner healer or your inner child? Come on. Like
Right.
you can do that in a couple of years, I'm sure. But
right. Well, and I think that's key, right? You said,
yeah.
I'm sure you can do it in a couple of years, but it takes courage to do that.
Oof,
Right?
yeah.
I look at all the moments
Getting that
that I
courage
was
is no
scared.
joke.
Exactly. It's no joke to find that courage. I mean, there's a reason why people say like it's courageous to drink ayahuasca over and over and over. Well, I think it's courageous to do psychedelics, period, over and over and over when you're doing them for healing.
Right.
I had no idea what I was getting in all of these journeys. I had no idea where I was going to end up. I just knew I wanted to stay the fuck out of my own way. And my life was better every time I did psychedelics because it helped me improve my life.
Mm-hmm.
And it took a lot of courage to take 750 mics to know that I was working with Little Dena that day.
750. Oh my goodness. Yeah. But it's like, you know, what's the Terrence McKenna line? Like you jump into the void and you realize that what you land on is a big feather bed.
Yeah.
And
that's honestly how I feel now.
Yeah. right?
Right? Like anxiety's gone. I'm taking bigger actions than I've ever taken in my life. I'm manifesting even bigger things, like even more epic and amazing than I even thought possible. Like, I'll take that feather bed.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's like, it's come to the edge. You're going to take the step off to realize it wasn't a cliff at all. It was just a step.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Right.
So where do we want to go, Dena,
Yeah.
with this?
Well, I want to just also bring it back around here, Joe, about psychedelic ministry, right? Ministry is my calling. Psychedelics are my religion. I am gearing up now to use my own healing journey as the foundation for my own podcast, which is Psychedelic Ministry. It'll be coming out in early-ish 2020. And I'm going to utilize
2021.
thanks, 2021. Time warp, thank you. What's time?
It'll happen.
Exactly. And to kind of pull in different experts and different modalities that have been incorporated in my healing journey, right? From things like Akomi and NLP to the body keeps the score, parts work, all sorts of different things. I want to bring in experts and interview them and share my healing journey. It's kind of this continuous thread through it. But I'm also going to be sharing episodes from the healing work I've been doing with my mom and my sister. They gave me permission to record those and to share them because I think it's such a great model for other people. There's going to be so many different beautiful elements to this podcast to really utilize it to showcase the healing work we can do with psychedelics, the visionary work we can do with psychedelics, because I also utilize them for visionary purposes. And that's part of why I am now living the most amazing life I could possibly live. And it just keeps getting even better. Right. So bringing in a bunch of layers. So I would love to invite folks to join me in that podcast, Psychedelic Ministry. You can come to ecstaticcollective.com/podcast and opt in to receive updates as that podcast is coming out and to get notified of new episodes, to help us with the launch so that the launch of that podcast is successful. So that's kind of a big deal. And also to keep in touch with me because of the Psychedelic Retreat Center we are currently working on and how that evolves. I imagine you and I will be, of course, talking about that because we stay in touch. And
No doubt.
This is epic and amazing. And you already kind of know some of what's happening with that, but it's going to be pretty significant to get to share this moving forward. So,
yeah, I can't really wait to learn more. I know a little bit, but I really can't wait for the full picture.
Yeah, the next couple of weeks will be incredibly telling and everything looks super amazing and bright. So we're super excited about all of the magic that's happening. And just want to say too, like, if you're out there and you've heard this and you've resonated in any way, reach out to me on social media, send me a private message, whatever you need to do. I'm here. I care about your story. Your experience matters. Your healing matters. We want to support you. Let us know if there's anything we can do for you, even if it's just like, hey, that resonated. Thank you for sharing. It's sitting with me. I'm moving through stuff. Like, we're sending you good vibes. We're sending you the energy. So please know that you're not alone in this, and you don't have to be alone in this.
Amen. And Dena, what is your website?
Again, it's ecstaticcollective.com. The word ecstatic is ECSTATIC. EC static. It's complicated for some reason.
I never thought of parsing it that way. That's great.
Yeah, it's good.
Awesome. Well, Dena, I really appreciate you sharing all this with us. And I just can't wait to keep co-creating with you.
Yeah, me too. Thanks, Joe. Joe, you and Kyle are doing such an incredible job with Psychedelics Today. Thank you for the educational content and courses you put out there that are helping people navigate psychedelics safely and with intention. The work you guys are doing to create incredible education and spread the word is so fantastic. And I love getting to collaborate with you and see what you guys are doing. I'm so proud of you guys.
Thank you very much, Dena.
You're welcome. Thank you for also allowing me to just talk today and to share this really vulnerable story with you and your listeners. And this kind of misshapen way, but I kept trusting that it would come out as needed. So thank you for the time, for the space, for the opportunity to share and to hopefully help other people. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely, Dena. Until next time.
Sounds good. Thank you, Joe.
I hope you all enjoyed that. Dena is a dear friend, provided me a lot of support over the last couple of years, and just really appreciate how Dena operates in the world. So much encouragement, so much positivity. It's incredible. And I'm just really excited to see what happens over the next few months and years for Dena. There's so much rapid change all the time in her world, and amazing positive direction. So just really happy to know Dena, and really happy to have a friendship with her and her community to a degree. And yeah, for those of you who haven't checked it out, her NLP training is extraordinary. So try to reach out about that. Ecstatic Collective and Psychedelic Ministries. Yeah, her work with non-ordinary states, NLP, and psychedelia generally is just phenomenal. So check that stuff out. And I hope you dig it. And yeah, again, thank you, Dena. Thank you for your vulnerability and your deep sharing. It's powerful. And it's probably hit on that part. So yeah, thanks again. And if you want to learn more about what we offer on Psychedelic Education Center, please jump over there, psychedeliceducationcenter.com. You can learn about our 8-week program for clinicians and therapists and our many other educational offerings. So I think that's it for now. So thank you all for tuning in. And this is Joe Moore signing off for Psychedelics Today from Breckenridge, Colorado. We will see you on Friday. Bye-bye.